This guy he's our favorite Britisher. So that alone should be enough. But he's creator of the 5-Minute News, and he is the Midas Touch host. How about it for Anthony Davis? Hello, sir.
Hello, sir. Nice to see you. How are you doing?
I'm well. It's just a lot to stomach these days, with everything that you discuss on your show, and that even in your 5-Minute News you cover. How do you do the reducto on all that's going on in a 5-Minute News, Anthony Davis?
It's pretty difficult. I think that the way you achieve that is you just do the facts and none of the opinion, This is a question I get asked a lot, because obviously I have my own views, but 5-Minute News, my daily podcast, is an unbiased, non-partisan political news program, right? So not something that American people are very used to. Where I'm from, you have to be non-partisan when you report the news. It's completely possible, so it's kind of no effort from my perspective. But I think a lot of Americans struggle. And this is something that has come up a lot, hasn't it, with these debates like you were just having with your earlier guest, is that emotions run so high. And the idea that you can put aside your personal views and just report the facts is actually quite a difficult notion. And when we're talking about Israel and Hamas and Gaza and the Palestinians, there is a bias. There is an intrinsic bias in American news coverage and American allegiance, because the US, the same with the UK, with Britain and France, created the Israeli state in 1948. So of course there's going to be a bias. You can't get away from that. It's like it's the Brits think of it as theirs, Americans think of it as theirs, the French think of it as theirs. So they're never going to be like, this didn't really work, because that's the reality of this, isn't it? That it doesn't really work. And Netanyahu he's been elected how many times now? 6 or 8 times in the last 30 years. I mean, I remember him when I was a kid. This is crazy to have somebody around for that long. So,
well, he's also become, I think, maybe this is the wrong word, but I'll use it anyway, radicalized with this really right-wing power grab that he's created in this fractionalized government of Israel.
He had to side with some of the furthest right people in order to, because he's being investigated for corruption, Mark. So of course he wants to maintain a government. And the critics say, well, this war cabinet, I mean, it prevents him from being the sole person responsible for this counterattack. The coalition government that he's created, it prevents him from being the sole person responding to this offensive. No one is denying that the attack by Hamas, which was a surprise attack, was anything other than atrocious. Right? Nobody is questioning that. But the national conversation, or the international conversation, has now moved to a place about how proportionate the response from Israel is. And that's what I find most interesting.
The spot that the Israelis find themselves in, I was talking about this in the last hour, it's such a difficult spot.
Yeah.
Let me just start with the real weird fact that has to be, that in any formula that comes up with an answer has to be taken into account, just in terms of what likely outcomes there are.
Yes.
The politics. If after 9/11, I was saying this the first half hour, we had said, well, we have to understand that, we're America and we can't necessarily just, go in and obliterate a country, whatever version of that might have been, it wouldn't have been politically survivable. You needed to do something. America felt all the things you just suggested, the surprise, awful attack of 9/11. Now, this is being viewed in Israel, as you're aware, as a much bigger deal than 9/11. It's more pogrom-like, it's more, Holocaust-like. But the politics demand you do something. I mean, even in America, leave aside this super right-wing guy, Netanyahu. So that's just the politics. Then there is sort of the humanity of it. It's you've just endured this awful thing. And the barbarism associated with it, the wanton barbarism that can't be countenanced. But then, as you say, what do you do? What is proportionate?
Well, I know what I would do. I mean, and it's nothing to do with me, Mark, but if it was, I would not retaliate. And I would say, okay, you've made your point. for the sake of these, 1,000 people plus that have lost their lives, we are not going to retaliate, but we are going to talk. And we're going to use this as a moment in history, as a line in the sand, to divide up the territory and learn to live in peace. And
so who has the agency, though, Anthony, to be part of that conversation, to be part of, who do you talk to?
Well, Mahmoud Abbas would be up for that. He is the Palestinian leader, although he's an old man. I think
he has no power also, as you know, right?
No, of course. And this is the problem because, Hamas are... Look, Palestinians are not Hamas. Hamas are a terrorist organization, as designated by the UK and the UN. So you've got a terrorist organization running your country. So how do you, or running your region? So how do you deal with that? You just have to, Netanyahu is the wrong guy right now, right? He has always been a bit of a warmonger. He's always been on the far right. He might keep his views personal, but, he is a populist. He has played a game to remain in power for decades. And this is the problem now. It's all come to a head. That surprise attack caused a knee-jerk reaction. You referenced 9/11. I mean, George W. Bush decided to pick the Iraqis to blame for 9/11 and went and bombed the hell out of them. And then Afghanistan, and then they found them in Pakistan. I mean, and they were Saudi Arabians. I mean, it was a complete mess.
Of course.
So, history is repeating itself, in my view. And somebody has to be the person to step up and say, okay, to respond is the obvious thing to do, but to not respond and to bring about some kind of peace talks is the right thing to do. And Anthony Blinken is run off his feet right now because he's the guy behind the scenes doing all the work.
Right. And certainly that which you've just described is, I would suggest, the preferred route. Sadly, not only is Netanyahu the wrong guy, as you say, but Hamas is the wrong group.
Yeah.
So you've got, a group that's committed to the elimination of every Jew on the planet and the elimination of Israel, certainly.
But there was a leader of Hamas who was available that Israel gave back in a prisoner swap a few years ago. Do you see what I mean? I mean, there have been opportunities to deal with this. And Israel have been, bombing the hell out of Gaza in multiple different styles and ways for years. And so, this is not a new thing. And to say, oh, this came as a surprise, I mean, they were rehearsing the paragliding thing just over the fence.
Well, that's part of the embarrassment and the humiliation, which, as Anthony says, is just crazy. I mean, it's... you had every indication. The Egyptians warned you.
Yeah.
But how U.S. and Israeli intelligence ignored it, I mean, I think it was complacency. And also, this speaks to Netanyahu, his preoccupation, his utter preoccupation with this getting around the judiciary.
Yeah.
And he had his really just dropped the ball completely and got complacent, as I say.
So he took his eye off the ball because he was distracted with his corruption trial and everything else. So he's the one that should take the fall for this, not innocent Palestinians. And, Joe Biden's been rather amazing. I don't know if you saw the 60 Minutes interview that he did yesterday or the day before. It's just gone online. I mean, to talk about the differences between Trump and Biden, Biden off the back of this could be heralded one of the kind of great war presidents. He has been measured and calm. And now that the initial, the initial attack is over and people have kind of come to terms with what happened, now he's starting to talk to Americans about the fact that Palestinians need somewhere to live and that innocent Palestinians need a place even to evacuate. We're hearing about bombs being dropped on these, safe exit routes out of Gaza. So he's starting to educate Americans that Hamas and Palestinians are not the same and that we need to start thinking about Palestinians as people who ultimately want peace. They don't want to live under the Hamas regime, but really there's no route to dealing with that. And go on.
I was just going to say, after 9/11, I was traveling overseas, and I was vehemently against the invasion of Iraq. I mean, I used to go round and round like as loud as I could scream at people. It was just crazy. It seemed like so concocted, clearly for
Yeah, and anyone with a brain knew that was the wrong target, right?
Oh my God! But anyway. as I traveled Europe, I remember having to say, people asked where I was from, and I said, I'm from the U.S., and then I had to say, and I don't support the war in Iraq. I don't support American militarism. I don't expect, and you began to try to separate yourself in many conversations from your government. I feel as though the Gazans would, if they could, separate themselves from Hamas, that we don't sanction what happened. That's not what we're about.
But they're being used as human shields.
Yeah,
right?
they're being used
so
as human
if they
shields.
were to say stuff like that, they'd get executed. And this is the problem. It's like living under the types of regimes we've seen in North Korea or in Russia. If you come out and speak against the authority, then, in North Korea, if you speak out against the authority or even break the law, you don't just get imprisoned or executed. They take your whole family. I don't think people realize how these dictatorships operate. And this is the problem here, is that obviously Hamas are an unknown quantity. And it's hard to differentiate between Palestinians and Hamas because they look the same, they dress the same. They put these headquarters under schools and hospitals. They purposely hide amongst civilians. That's part of their tactic. But something very interesting happened the other day. There's been marches in the UK and London, pro-Palestinian marches, not pro-Hamas, as your earlier guest was saying, pro-Palestinian. There is a difference. And, I am pro-Palestinian as much as I am pro-Israeli. I'm not pro-Hamas. They're the terrorist organization, right? And if you want to talk about whether or not Netanyahu is a terrorist, well, that's another conversation for after this war has come and gone. And I'm sure that The Hague and the international community will have something to say about that, as they already are about some of the response. 6,000 bombs in 24 hours. That was more than were dropped on Afghanistan, during a year. And I should also add, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here. Do you know how many civilians were killed post 9/11 by the United States in theaters of war, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, other places? 500,000. 500,000 civilians caught up in this. Not to mention 7,000 U.S. personnel, military personnel, who've died in these wars. So war is dangerous. War means death. But the Israeli spokespeople, and this is the point I wanted to make, the Israeli spokespeople are seeing these peaceful protests supporting the Palestinians. I actually watched it, and I'm in the process of making a video about this. The Israeli government spokesperson came out and said, these people are marching in support of Hamas, and therefore, and I was like, whoa! And the newscaster, unfortunately, didn't stop him. No, they're not. And Israel are being blind as to how people are thinking. And the problem is, if you are either an Israeli or Israeli Jew, it's not just Jews in Israel, remember, plenty of Christians in Israel, and the Holy Land is just as holy for multiple religions, that there is an intrinsic bias to defend your own territory. And I personally don't have any links to Israel. I have been there once, but I don't have any links to it. So to me, Israel and potential Palestinian territory should be equal for equal people. But the Israelis, and certainly Netanyahu, they do not see it that way. And they will, put out propaganda to make it look like, this thing about beheading babies, that's not been verified, Mark.
Right.
Our own president said it out loud, but it hadn't been verified. The White House had to walk it back. There's a lot of propaganda out there.
The death of the babies was verified and is verified in horrifying ways, but you're right. There's been no independent confirmation of the beheading, which, by the way, is an odd distinction. I always feel as though but yet it's important, because war has disinformation of all sorts that infiltrates
but it's overly emotional.
Yes, exactly.
And it's designed to bring about an emotion because Israel is seeking international support for its response.
But it's comical is the only word. In the darkest comical sense, ridiculous and absurd to take this horror, which is the killing of a baby. Okay, one baby after another. There were a lot killed, and somehow go, but I'm going to even amp it up more and say that there was beheading. So it's as you suggest, it's trying to create even higher ground. Hey, you've already got the high ground.
Agreed.
You don't need to create even higher ground by concocting a story.
The music festival was the highest ground for me, right? An event that was full of young people having a good time, minding their own business, and then suddenly the shooting starts.
Well, and many of them are peaceniks. I mean, there are more peaceniks in that crowd that was killed than you'll ever find in any other sort of random crowd. There are a lot of, even the occupants of the kibbutzes in that part of Israel, many of them are peaceniks. It's a bizarre situation. All right, my last couple of minutes here, and I love that we're visiting, and thank you for visiting, and thank you for wearing the same glasses that I have.
It's a pleasure.
Because it does add a legitimacy to me. But I want to talk about Jim Jordan. This guy, this dysfunctional government that we have in this country, has created the perfect storm for Jim Jordan to perhaps almost literally muscle his way to the speakership.
Yeah.
He has his game is the same as Trump's. It's one of intimidation. It's one of physical intimidation. People feel scared to go up against this guy.
Well, because he's a bit of an unknown quantity, isn't he? He's one of these. He's never voted for a bill on anything. I mean, the guy is a manipulator. He obviously has all this form when he worked in a school and covered up the abuse of young people who are now coming forward as adults, dozens of them, and yet that doesn't seem to affect his chances of getting the speakership. I was thinking last night, what will U.S. politics look like with Jim Jordan as speaker? I mean, it is horrifying to think of how this will play out, because he really is a bottom feeder. He is the worst of them. And when I watch him in these committee hearings, without his jacket on, pointing and shouting, it's all propaganda. Nothing he says is based in truth. I can't work out if he's just an idiot or whether he's a very calculated propagandist, because some of the stuff he says is so dumb. The arguments that he presents are so dumb. He is a terrible, terrible person. And there's a lot of terrible people in politics, right? They're there. I mean, look at George Santos screaming in the corridors the other day, trying to distract from his own indictment by claiming that somebody else was, anti-Israel and running. And I mean, it was the weirdest thing, swearing, the weirdest thing. But Jim Jordan is so weird and so dangerous. And there's going to be a vote tomorrow at noon.
He doesn't, at least by the pure book, the X's and O's wouldn't suggest he'd have enough votes to get in.
Yeah.
But what I worry about is that the sheer tiresome nature of vote after vote after vote, and Jordan will wait to the votes. He doesn't care. There's no humiliation.
As they did with McCarthy, 15 rounds of voting to get there. And shouting on the House floor and almost fisticuffs on the House floor.
And Jordan, I think, as Anthony has correctly said, is sort of this... he's all about recriminatory politics. He's all about revenge. He's a fire-breathing dragon of hate.
Yeah.
And he'll get nothing done legislatively for the people, but he will carry the water of Donald Trump. And when it comes to J6, he was on the phone a lot with Donald Trump, and and has denied subpoenas, wouldn't appear before the committee, knows a lot about January 6th that will never... I mean, he's
a plotter and an insurrectionist. And
exactly.
This is the problem, isn't it? That we have one insurrectionist who's trying to run for president. We have another one who's trying to run for House Speaker. And my view, I think I said this to you last time, is that the insurrection is still going on. January 6th was the riot. But in terms of the work that is going on behind the scenes to install Donald Trump, this is all still happening. And it's manipulation, and it's a coup in plain sight. And, we deserve better. As a country, we deserve better.
That's so well said. And the other thing I would just say is that even right now, leave aside trying to get Trump elected, the way that the administration has been derailed in terms of confirmations, in terms of military promotions, and there's a serious effort underway, and I suspect it will be successful come November 17th, to turn the lights off, to essentially... shut the government down.
But that's all part of the insurrection, right? The idea that the government shutdown happens under Joe Biden's administration because it happened 3 times under Trump, This is all designed to make Biden look bad and manipulate it so that the Republicans can again use false propaganda. And, I want the Republicans to have I want the Republican Party, but I also want conservative people to have decent representation, right? I want them to have a leader who can engage in balanced political discourse. And they deserve it as much as Democrats deserve it. And I don't sit in either camp. There's no political party that even comes close to representing my political views in the U.S.
Here is a quick comment for you, and I just wonder if you can respond to it, since you might have a better perspective than anyone. Aussie Rules asks, does UK also have its Jim Jordans, Santoses, and DJTs?
Well, yeah, Boris Johnson was Donald Trump in a blonde wig. I mean, very different people, and obviously a much smaller country, 65 million versus 330 million. So different scale of country, different scale of economy. I think California is a bigger economy than the whole of the UK. But it all boils down to people who are populists and people who are, they just don't care much for humanity. They put themselves first. And, this is what we've seen with Donald Trump recently, putting himself ahead of anything else. He, in fact, in a conversation he had the other day, I saw him being interviewed, he compared himself to Jesus. He said, I am basically more famous than Jesus. And then he pretends that he's like, oh, well, I didn't say that. This guy I was golfing with basically said it. And I was watching him during this interview, and I was like, he totally made that up. Like, he obviously in bed one night or sitting up in the middle of the night watching TV and truthing. He's like, how do I get to a point where I can say that I'm more famous than Jesus? And then the next day he says something to backtrack to that moment. Oh, I can see his brain working because he's an imbecile. The clip's out there. It's so funny.
Oh, my God. I have to get that.
Don't talk to me that way.
All right. Anthony Davis, you're so great, man. So enjoy you. You are my favorite Britisher. That'll never change.
You're very sweet.
The creator of the 5-Minute News and the Midas Touch host. Midas Touch, as you know, just a massive, massive franchise, and because it's got great people like Anthony as part of it. And again, I draw attention to the fact that we wear the same glasses, so in a sense, that makes me as intellectually gifted as you.
We also have the same family of microphones, so I think
it is true. This mic is the same as you see. That is the same microphone. I love that you noticed that too. Yeah. Come visit again, will you please?
You bet. All the best to you.
Anthony Davis, you too, pal. Love it. Love, 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 love. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.